Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Frank Menchaca from SA International. I run Sustainable Mobility Solutions, which is the innovation arm of SA. I'd like to, they told us to line up around our name. That shouldn't be difficult, so I'm going to move to the end. And I'd like to invite my co-panelists to come on stage. So far, so good. We're lining up under our names. We're managing to make this work.
Seems like we're short one chair. Okay.
We're short a chair.
Jennifer, I think. Yeah, there we go.
So while we're getting set up, I have to say, I have run an events business, and no one ever does this, but I'm going to do this. Could we have a round of applause for all of the people who put this event on? It's really a lot of work. An events business is something where people only notice when something goes wrong. So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to the people who put this event together. So I would like to give my co-panelists a chance to introduce themselves, starting with Jennifer.
Thanks, Frank. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Taylor. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Institutional Affairs for the Western region for Enel. Enel is an energy company. We are globally headquartered in Italy. We're one of the largest utility companies in the world. In North America, where we've been doing utility scale energy development, including solar, wind, storage, and now green hydrogen and geothermal as well. We've been in the country, in the North American region for about 20 years, and we're headquartered in Boston. But we also do that important customer-sided work. We do a lot of demand response. We do distributed energy resources, including, they handed me a microphone, and then I just didn't use it at all. And I thought that my theater background could carry all the way up to the back. So sorry about that. Should I start again, Frank, or should I just keep rolling?
I think mostly people heard you, but...
So we also do the important work of customer-sided and distributed resources, including, again, behind-the-meter batteries, demand response, and really helping customers leverage and optimize their energy usage and energy costs. And then finally, we have an e-mobility division that looks at everything from resi, and then we're working all the way up into the space of electrifying our school buses and our school systems and our transit systems. I have only been at the company for about 7 months. I came from the Nevada Governor's Office of Energy, where I led our transportation electrification work and our energy security work. So I'm really excited to be here because I was part of some of the early discussions on how we incentivize at the state level, and then how we bring those federal programs down into the states to make sure that states are able to really leverage the funds that were provided through the IIJA and now through the IRA. And so thank you very much for having me today.
Awesome. Prescott.
Hi, everyone. My name is Prescott. I'm one of the general partners at RedBlue Capital, and along with my partner, we invest in transportation technologies and services globally. We're early-stage investors, so typically we partner with teams from the seed stage through to what we call early product market fit. We focus on transportation, which obviously has a big footprint in energy, and we are a research-driven firm. So I'd say, unlike the traditional VC you'll see, we spend a lot more time talking with the end customers, going to new geographies, meeting fleet partners, and asking, what are you doing for electrification, from the infrastructure side to the fleet management side to vehicle procurement. And so we spend a lot of time understanding from the voice of customer how the electrification revolution is going to be playing out. I guess last but not least, I guess I'm kind of like the representative from private industry, so to speak, on this panel, so I'll try to be translating a bit between some of the acronyms and what's happening on the policy side and kind of what that means for the startup world.
All right, thank you. And Elise.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I'm a partner at Wilson Sonsini. I am in our climate solutions practice. Many of you know Wilson Sonsini because we're the new economy firm. We were founded with Google, among others, and have represented Tesla for many, many years. I think what's most important about us is we've never opposed climate mitigation. We're mission aligned. I mean that in every sense of the word. I've been doing clean electrons for 20 years. I also am at the Stimson Center, which is a nonpartisan think tank. We've won a MacArthur Prize for our pragmatic solutions relating to climate change. And that's important to me as well. I'd love to be a policy person. I'm not. My job is to move money, and I have represented for the last 12 years, a little bit more. I started representing landowners, publicly traded REITs who were integrating electric vehicles into their multi-use properties. I then moved on to representing innovation companies and a leading U.S. OEM in its electrification. And I think that's where I should actually turn and ask you all as we start, who owns an electric vehicle? Awesome. Who has solar on their roof? Who wants to integrate their electric vehicle into their solar? Good. I think we're going to have a really fun discussion today. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm Frank. I run Sustainable Mobility Solutions, which is an innovation arm of SAE International. Just a little bit about SAE. We are the oldest and largest organization for engineers in aerospace, automotive, and commercial vehicle. We were founded in 1905 by Henry Ford as the Society of Automotive Engineers. We were combined with the Society of Aeronautic Engineers, no change in acronym, which is always fortunate. And that was under Orville Wright. You may know us from our standards, so if you've ever had a rental car and you wondered which side of the car the gas tank is on, we're the people who made the pointer. That's always good. If you've ever put a child safety seat into a car, that's us. If you've ever entered or exited an airplane and wondered, gee, what would happen if I had to go quickly? That's us. We were founded in New York in 1971, I think. An enterprising young real estate executive by the name of Donald Trump summarily tossed us out of our building. And so we ended up in Warrendale, Pennsylvania, which is just a few miles north of Pittsburgh.
All of these kudos.
So yeah, so we would never have made it to Pittsburgh if it weren't for the Donald. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. But anyway, let's get down to the topic. So first of all, we all talked before. We would like you to interrupt us. We'd like you to ask questions. We'd like you to interject. A little controversy goes a long way, so please feel free. I'll do my best Phil Donahue and kind of run up the stairs and, pass out the microphone. So incentivizing the age of EVs. In our kind of initial discussion, we talked about the fact that the age of EVs comes with a lot of baggage. There needs to be an entirely new infrastructure. And when you think about incentives, we have $7.5 billion of federal funding flowing into states. We have the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a lot that's going on. And I think over the next hour, what we want to do is kind of unpack that. What is the current state? How are we going to actually execute and spend this money in a responsible way? How are we going to keep tied out to taxpayers? How are we going to have the right kind of workforce that not only puts this into the ground but maintains it? What does that mean for workforce going forward? What does it mean from a technical point of view, from a data sharing point of view? So there's all sorts of really great touchy topics that we want to get into. So we really want to hear from you. So I guess I'll start by asking my panelists, how would we characterize kind of the current state of the electric vehicle infrastructure such that we need to incentivize it? I'm told by companies that I work with that charging fails about 30% of the time. We're doing a lot of work on that with the federal government. I don't know if anybody here is from Berkeley, UC Berkeley, but Berkeley did a study that found that, fails about 25 to 30% of the time. So that's kind of where we're starting. Maybe perspectives from the panel on how you see the current state that we're incentivizing. Maybe that'll drive some of our decisions about what we need to incentivize.
Okay, I guess I'm down here at the end,
Yeah,
so I
go
will
for
start.
it.
I think that's an incredibly important point, Frank, about the failure rate on chargers. And I think that the current state of our EV charging infrastructure and our EV charging network is one that, let's make no mistake about it, needs some improvement, needs some connectivity, needs some standards around things like reliability. For the average person who buys an EV, it is a complicated decision. It's not like you just go buy a Subaru and then you can put the gas pump in. It doesn't matter whether it's, which brand it is. It's always going to be standardized. And that's something that's come over years and years. We're being asked to do a lot in a really small amount of time because there's an expectation that this new technology that has started in sort of, I don't want to say fits and starts, but has started in a myriad of directions with different technologies is suddenly going to become seamless and suddenly become perfect. And I think that we all recognize that there needs to be a lot of work, and we're really fortunate to have industry, government, the O&Ms, all of these folks working together to get to that point. So with that being said, I think that the biggest things that are a challenge right now are what we hear from EV drivers. Where can I charge? How long is it going to take me to charge? And then I would add on to, like, am I actually getting the charge that I'm paying for? And when I go to the station, is it going to work? So I know that from our perspective at Enel, one of the biggest policy drivers that we want to look at is that reliability standard, and how can we all work together across the industry to come to what we know will best serve our EV customers. The other thing I would say about the state of the EV infrastructure right now is the connectivity of it. We're doing really good in urban areas, I think, but I think that there's room to improve around multifamily housing installations, around public charging, and really when we look, especially here in the West, California is, what did you just tell me, Frank? 5th largest vehicle economy in the country. Well, if you have an EV and you want to go to Colorado, you're going through my home state of Nevada. How are you going to get there? Can you actually get all the way across Nevada? And that's part of what NEVI was intended to do, was create that interstate connection. But we know that when the interstate highways that we all drive on, the 10, the 20, the 15, when those were built, it took 35 years to put all that together. So again, we're being asked to do things at a really fast click. And so we can look at some of the states in the West that have been working on this for a while, and how now having NEVI funds can help leverage that and move that forward. But from an industry perspective, we also have to look at, like, is that going to be the best way to move the infrastructure and the networks forward for ourselves and for our business models? So there's really a lot to think about, and to Frank's point, there's really a lot to unpack and dig down, and there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of challenges. And I will pass it with that.
So I'm really of two minds. To your point, with NEVI and other funding sources going for highway funding, allowing people to do the road trips and to make sure that charging availability and reliability is strong, that's going to be a problem that's going to be solved over the coming years. I don't think we have any significant bottlenecks there. The funding is there. It's starting to flow. The reason I'm of two minds, though, is we're sitting at a crossroads where we have to decide how our transportation system is going to change. And our transportation system in the US has been built around the car, and it's been built around the idea that you buy a car, it sits in your garage, and the car that's going to drive you to work is the same car that's going to drive you from Los Angeles to Colorado. And the energy crisis that we're facing, or the climate crisis that we're facing, should be challenging us to think, why do I have to have a car with a 100 kilowatt hour battery that can drive on an interstate and get me to Colorado? What if I just had a smaller car with a smaller battery that I use in the city, and on the once a year maybe that I drive to Colorado, I'll just rent a car? And what if the car that I rented was free, because the government, instead of having to get me to buy a massive battery and a massive vehicle that's incredibly expensive, what if the government just said, hey, buy a smaller car, and if you happen to need a nice big car for your road trip, we'll give it to you for free. I know it sounds politically unpalatable to say that, but yeah, I mean, we're heading in the right direction. It's going to be solved. It's just also at what cost, and what could we have done with this money that we, if we hadn't been wasting it, in my view, on trying to perpetuate a one-for-one equivalent of our current transportation system, where you look around the world and there's countries that have different setups all the time. You want to go between two cities in Japan, you just get on a train, right? The problem really is that we refuse to acknowledge that leadership, political leadership, is not about saying, okay, consumers, what do you want? Oh, you want to have absolutely no lifestyle change because you actually don't know what another lifestyle could be like? We're going to give you all the money possible to just keep you from ever having to feel any sort of discomfort, right? Real political leadership would be saying there's another transportation system possible. But that being said, yeah, I think with NEVI funding, highway charging infrastructure is actually on a very good track, and you should be able to get to Colorado in the next few years without having to run into too many charging issues, so that's good.
Yeah, I really like what both of you said. I have a slightly different perspective even, and hopefully it resonates with some folks. I really feel like electrification, and let me say it even slightly more differently, electric drivetrains, so battery charging and or hydrogen for long haul, which is, for me, is the only way forward, offers an opportunity not to have a gas station on every corner. And I want to make sure that as we design the charging system nationally, that we do it as a model of efficiency and as a model for reducing and appropriately managing consumption, not by having surplus chargers everywhere just because we are fear-driven, which I don't think is appropriate. Certainly, it's not appropriate for this innovation economy that we sit in here. It's not appropriate for people who are thinking about the future. And it's certainly not an appropriate use of equipment, technology, systems, whether we're talking about electrons or otherwise. And so I feel like we can do two things, right? One, we can optimize the location and opportunities for charging and the equipment. And secondarily, we can collaborate to be able to have a better integration in systems so that you know where and how to charge, so that you feel safe and secure whichever vehicle you're using, the free long haul one or the one that you use around your neighborhood. And I think it's really important that we stand up and talk about that more often, that it get designed in the way we want it to, in the way that we want our vehicles to be designed as well. And so there are some things that we missed in the first years. High quality synthesized charging, an IMPO-like standard that all of industry met, deciding what were the optimal chargers and allocating capital appropriately. That we're engaged in that process now, and I find it heartening, comforting, and I think it will serve us well.
So I think, Prescott, you touched on something that I want to kind of pull on this thread of behavior change, and the role of behavior change as we think about sustainability. So let me kind of set this next part up. So there's a study that was done at Princeton called Net Zero America, which really looks at, the transportation industry alone is accountable in the United States for about 27% of greenhouse gas emissions. Worldwide, it's about 25%. It's one of the biggest emitters. And I think the U.S. alone in 2020 produced something like 6 million metric tons of greenhouse gas. And just to give you an idea, if we want to get to net zero, we have to start diminishing by about 6 billion per year. That's a huge step change. And I think, Prescott, you introduced something that I think is really worth talking about. Are we coming at this problem with old mental models? So that very same Princeton study says, okay, if we want to get to net zero emissions by 2050, we probably need to have 328 million electric vehicles on the road, which is 94% of all transportation. But is that the right thing? Is that the right incentive? Or are we bringing kind of the individual car ownership model forward, as just an assumption that this is just going to be an extension of what we currently do? Or are we not going far enough and thinking, is that what we're incenting, or should we be incenting something else? So I'd kind of like to throw out to the audience and to the panel this idea of paradigm change, behavior change. If we're going to go through what is essentially the equivalent of the next industrial revolution, which took about 250 years, the last one in the next 2 decades, can we really expect to bring the same kind of mental models to this work? Or should we, in addition to what we're currently talking about, be thinking about radically different forms of transportation? It's a big question.
But it's not radical.
Yeah.
It's as simple as saying to people that live in cities, we're going to spend billions of dollars on building protected bike lanes and subsidize the purchase of e-bikes and change zoning regulations so you can actually have dense downtowns. But aside from the radical vision, you don't have to rethink transportation to see problems in the way we're incentivizing things. You mentioned 27% of emissions coming from transportation, but that's a very misleading figure, and because more than half of our transportation emissions don't come from our personal cars. They come from medium and heavy duty transportation and buses. And if you include a lot of light duty vehicles, which are like the Ford F-150s of the world, which are frequently serving commercial uses, that goes up north of 65%. So if we actually cared about climate and not cared about buying votes with subsidies for the everyday consumer, specifically for upper middle class consumers, because it's rich people that can afford to buy EVs. If we actually cared about the climate, we'd focus on electrifying commercial fleets before consumer vehicles. And it's also a much simpler thing to start tackling than trying to solve the I have to charge anywhere I want to drive anywhere kind of mentality. So you don't have to rethink everything. It's about the order in which you do it, because there are constraints. I like to say we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but given the battery shortage, we may not be able to. We may actually have to select which vehicles you want to prioritize. And now, by subsidizing the Hummer EV, that's a battery that could have gone into an e-bike or into a commercial vehicle that actually does a lot more miles every year.
Or 180 of them.
180 e-bikes, yeah.
Yeah, Jennifer.
So I would just sort of, I don't want to push back, but I'll push back a little bit. I think the behavior issue is something that, and this is me coming from my government perspective, we've been fighting this and looking at this for a while. Our Department of Transportation was trying so hard to figure out how to get people out of those single occupancy vehicles in a state that was based on sprawl. It is all so interconnected, and there are so many threads that go together that you cannot untangle one thing without untangling a lot of things, right? So like, I would love to take an e-bike to my work, but it's 20 miles from my house, or at least when I was at the state office. And it was on dangerous roads, and often, because I live in Las Vegas, it was 125 degrees. Like, I am very happy to have changed my behavior because now I work remotely. So I do not have to worry about my emissions. But that is a real thing for real people to have to deal with. So I'm just going to say that as a thing we have to think about. We have to think about zoning, we have to think about land use, and we have to think about those bigger picture items. Okay. The other thing I would say is that when we look at EVs, it's not just a matter of the EV itself. It's the entire ecosystem of the EV for its emissions, right? Where is the power coming from, and what is the source that is going to fuel that EV out of that EV charging station? What are the EV charging stations? What's the efficiency on them? At Enel X-Way, our EV charging stations are certified so that they are efficient and they do not have line loss. They do not have inefficiencies that contribute to additional emissions. We at Enel want to electrify everything. So when we look at everything from our generation down to the EVs, we want to make sure that that is all net zero, that is all carbon free. And so that's another piece that we need to look at, is even if you can get those medium and heavy duty vehicles, which would be fantastic, because you're right, it is a very small amount of of the tailpipe emissions are out of single occupancy vehicles. So how do we do that? Also, how do we put the infrastructure in for a medium and heavy duty fleet that can be supported by today's grid? And I would point to places like the NESCOM initiative, where they had 17 states, DC and Quebec, all working together to figure out policies, obstacles, and opportunities for those medium and heavy duty fleet operations that can move them forward in a way that can be net zero. So I just kind of wanted to point out again that ecosystem and just comment on the behavior thing, because it is so important. But I think in a lot of ways that is going to be the hardest thing to change. So
Yeah, I would add that
Corruption. I am following the gentleman's suggestion.
Yeah.
And I'm very, okay, thank you. Let me see your name. Frank. Appreciate it. Prescott. And I like both of your concern about sustainability and dependence on single vehicle. And it is great waste of resources in manufacturing and batteries, discarding them, and all these issues. And city centers are congested with cars, parking lots and stuff. It is a major issue. We have a solution for that for 50% of transportation. Here is, can you? They have better English. Beltways, we come up with solution beltways technology, and it is accelerating the beltways, the walkways in airports more than 10 times. We proved the concept, and I do think that for short-term radius of, let's say, 2 miles in inner cities, we can eliminate cars and open it for pedestrians.
fascinating. I think we also should, I'm a European as well as an American, and Enel happens to be not only my utility in the East Coast, but in Italy. And if folks have traveled there, you know that you can't drive a high-emission vehicle into city centers in most of Europe. Western Europe. That is just the reality. It's been the reality for somewhere between 2 and 5 years, and it has a fundamental effect on behavior. And I think that we could be smarter and learn better here in the United States about what's working elsewhere and adapt. But maybe this is me being glass half full. I'll probably get some of the details here a little wrong, so bear with me and you can correct me. But my recollection is that the longest Tesla wait list was somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 11 months. Anybody remember that well? Working for a large U.S. OEM that has featured a pickup, one of the best-selling pickups worldwide, the backlog is somewhere in the neighborhood, publicly reported, of 36 to 38 months. I think we have grossly misunderstood what Americans want for vehicles and who the typical electric vehicle driver is. And I think by starting to see who those drivers are and by responding to them, we're likely to get an acceleration in vehicle ownership, an acceleration in home integration of vehicles, and therefore a more rapid shift to the system that we all want for light-duty vehicles and what I'd say light-medium, not really doing real work.
Yeah, and Frank, if I can just add one really quick thing, because I meant to say this in my first answer, but Elise, your point of who wants to integrate their car with their solar, I mean, this is such a great opportunity, too, to talk about that holistic offering and how all of our energy pieces fit together with EVs, right? Like, again, the large-scale generation, the distributed resources, the opportunities with V2G and energy resilience and security. And so I think when we think about incentivizing EVs, we should also think about how all of that works together to move that forward.
Yeah, I think you raised a great point. The all of that, a big part of the all of that moves things forward is workforce. So I want to make sure we touch on workforce, and I'll maybe set this up in a couple of different ways. So We're working with anybody here know a company called Charger Help? So, yeah, okay. So we are working with this awesome company, Charger Help, which is essentially training electric vehicle charging station technicians, field technicians, the people who actually go out and try and figure out why a charging station isn't working. And we're in the process of certifying the skill set, the competencies of those field technicians. It's a wonderful opportunity. They are recruiting people into these clean tech jobs that do not fit the typical paradigm of clean tech jobs, but I think they're doing a great job of changing that. Women, people of color, people who don't necessarily have college degrees are able to do this, and this is the beginning for them of a scaffolding career in clean tech. So I think this is enormously exciting. Working with them has given us a bit of an understanding on what is going to be required to actually implement the electric vehicle infrastructure that we're incentivizing at the state level. So I'd like to maybe get your views, the panel's views, on the workforce that's going to be required and how prepared are we, and how much of an opportunity are we facing. Thoughts?
Okay, I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
So again, I'll come at this from two perspectives. Again, my work in the government and now my work for Enel. I think that we have so many opportunities to scale up for workforce as these stations get deployed and get installed. That's just one more piece of equipment that needs to be monitored, needs to be maintained. We are fortunate because there has been work on the workforce going on for a while. We can look at the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers programs, and their apprenticeship programs that have been going on for a while in Las Vegas. I'm really proud of our joint apprenticeship program that we have that was training solar workers and then seamlessly moved into how to train on EV charging systems to make sure that there are folks out there that can work on those systems. I think we also have to look at what we can leverage for existing workforce now, and one of those opportunities, especially in remote areas potentially, are our utility workers, because they've got linemen, they've got workers all over. So when you're out in the middle of a rural area, and if a charging station goes down, we really should be looking at how can we partner with the folks that already have people on the ground, like our large utilities. And then finally, I would say too that we really have an opportunity to incentivize a whole new area of study and training at our community and technical colleges to make sure that people are coming out of high school knowing that this is a path that they can pursue and that it's going to have the longevity of something like a utility worker. There's also really fantastic private sector companies like Frank mentioned that are working on incentivizing this as well. The thing from a policy perspective that I would want to caution about and that we want to be mindful as we're trying to rapidly scale up the workforce is that we want to make sure these folks are trained. We want to make sure that they can do the job and keep our charging stations up and keep our EVs running, frankly. But we don't want to put chilling policies on what workforce looks like and what workforce training looks like. So, you don't want to have a policy in place where only X set of workers with X set of training out of X set of entities can qualify for that work, because that'll put a chilling effect on the ability to rapidly scale up the workforce. Find those equivalencies, find those opportunities to leverage what exists, and find those opportunities to make training equivalencies part of the policy so that we're not put in a position where we're limiting ourselves to one set of workforce development standards.
Yeah.
But Jennifer, you agree that the IRA credit relating to apprenticeship and prevailing wage is a good thing?
Oh, absolutely. It's just one of the many, it's one of the many awesome pieces that exist to this puzzle and how we're going to put it together. I just know that there have been discussions at local governments about what
how you get trained.
how you get trained.
I think
And-
that's really important, and I agree that that distinction makes all of the difference. But if you are working on charger infrastructure, it's the difference between a 30% tax credit and a 6% tax credit. If you meet the prevailing wage for the specified period of time and you have apprenticeships, so I think you're exactly right that we're going to see an historic boom in education and commitment to better wages for workers working in the sector, and I think that can only be positive.
And I think because of the broad need, it's really going to open up those opportunities for a diverse workforce that may not have normally had those opportunities because it is going to be so large to scale.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think if stepping back a little bit and really looking at the landscape beyond just the EV charging that we've been talking about, the battery represents a whole other area for development of workforce. So Inflation Reduction Act is meant to incentivize battery creation, battery production in the United States. There's lots of tax credits that are associated with that. So lithium ion is kind of one of the major sources for batteries. The problem with lithium ion, it has to be mined. It's very labor intensive. It's very water intensive. I don't know. I like doing this. So how many people here have high school age children? Just show of hands. How many of them are aspiring geologists? Right? For a lot of reasons that we can kind of go into, we have, this is me speaking, we as a society have kind of moved away from that as an important thing to do. So the truth is that we are a long way off from having the right people with the traditional educational background to do work of battery sourcing in a responsible and sustainable way. Nonetheless, that has to be done. And so I tend to agree with you. I think if we play our cards right, we are potentially going into an age where there's enormous opportunity for people who are not coming up through the traditional educational ranks to get really good jobs that have a really good social benefit, that return an interest in math and science. And I say that as a humanist with a background in literature and a side practice in painting and music. I just think it's super important. So I wanted to make sure we got that point out. So I'd like to kind of shift the conversation a little bit. So the current EV infrastructure presupposes a lot of cooperation. So if you just look at what happens in one of those EV charging sessions, there is information that is flowing to the vehicle from the charging station and back. There's information that is flowing from the vehicle to the OEM. There's information that's flowing from the utilities. This is an awful lot of data. One thing that we have found is there's a lot of controversy about who will own this data, who will report on it, and how we will cooperate to establish standards of operation with this data. So I'm really interested in kind of how the panel and the audience think about developing a whole new infrastructure in a data age, and how we kind of navigate a very touchy and difficult area like data ownership.
So I don't want to steer away from your question, but responding to I think, pause. Data is frequently cited, and ownership of data is frequently cited as a major roadblock in infrastructure development. I don't think it is. The roadblocks for us to solve the charging problem have been solved. If you look at the last energy revolutions, they've all had to overcome the worst problem, which is different government agencies not knowing who was in charge of doing what, right? Mm-hmm. So, for the wind revolution to happen, you had to, fundamentally break what was energy utilities being monopolies regulated by their states. And eventually, it took multiple Supreme Court judgments. It took an Energy Policy Act, took PURPA, in the 70s, just to get to the point where you could build a wind farm and sell energy without getting sued and destroyed, right? That's not stopping us today. Like all those problems, which are fundamentally, we create government regulation because it seems like a good idea for today, but it turns out 50 years from now it's actually a terrible thing. That's all gone. So I feel like the fact that we're talking about who's going to share the data for my charging, like that's a very good sign, because what we could be talking about is, wait, why is it the case that the state governments have funding, but they're not going to release it to the local unless this, it's the people problems that are the hardest, and those are not really in the way of the energy infrastructure rollout as much as they have been in the way of the previous big energy revolutions in the US. So we're in a very good place.
Do you all agree? Just, for all of the electric vehicle owners, most of whom signed a contract saying that you would share your data to make the vehicle better and the charging system better, did that present any problems for you? Anyone who felt uncomfortable about that?
So I had a comment about your point and yours as well, Frank. I think one of the main roadblocks is not the ownership of the data, but how we wish to monetize it. And that whole battle around it is pretty much what causes, the market to move up or down on that topic. So if you have a comment on that.
Thank you.
Does that mean you would be comfortable selling your data?
Me personally, no. As a driver, I would like to have all the big stakeholders agree at some point on, it's not the ownership of the product, it's what we do with it and how we monetize the whole system around it and who benefits.
Yeah, and then,
Not thinking at something that is a goal that you own and you won't share it because it's not yet at the price you wish it.
No, understood.
yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say, is what is the data going to be used for? If you're going to share it, what's the purpose? That's the sort of, from a private sector perspective, that's the foundational question. So if I get a contract with NV Energy in Nevada to be their partner on an incentive program for installation of individual charging stations, Enel X-Way is going to probably have to agree to share certain amounts of the data so that the PUC, our Public Utilities Commission, can evaluate whether the program that ratepayers are funding was beneficial, and does it need more funding? Does it need less funding? If the goal is to hit X number of chargers, X amount of reduction in carbon emissions from tailpipes in Nevada, how are we hitting that? And so the data is really important, and I think that we can work around a fairly big module of data that would be willing to be shared for the right purpose. It's just you do get to some sticky, commercially sensitive issues that I think is where we're really going to kind of hit the brick wall. But for the most part, especially with public funding, that's kind of the trade-off. You get an incentive, but we need your data to see if this program is working as was intended to benefit the ratepayer, for example.
Yeah, and I think I could play the OEM side and say they want to know that vehicle charging optimization so that the battery has long life and meets its warranty is appropriately managed. And you could see how those are all high-value circumstances. They are a form of monetization, but I don't think they're an objectionable form of monetization. They're a shared value opportunity. I think mostly when people talk about data, they mean personal information and the fear that the data is not anonymized or sanitized. Yeah. And I don't know your perspective, but my perspective is most of that gets worked out in reasonable commercial ways that I don't think individuals worry about.
Can I just make a general I'm known for stupid comments. I just want to make a stupid comment. Driving is not a private act. You're engaging with the environment. And I think the more we press that point, the data resolves itself. And I think the shorthand is it will be fixed. I think what we need to do is just accelerate all these transitions as fast as we can.
Yeah, I would add, if I put on my aerospace hat, I think we got a pretty good model for this. So aerospace does not compete on safety. And I think we kind of got to help the four-wheel industry get over this. If something happens in the aerospace industry, if something goes wrong, if a plane goes down, there is an investigation, the data are shared, all of those results are shared, and that's a reason that our aerospace ecosystem is so dependable. And I agree 100%. I think that we have to kind of get over this phobic reaction or sort of histamine reaction to I own the data, it's all mine, and I need to monetize it because it's going to tell me how to push ads to you for your next pair of shoes on your car interface. So I kind of agree. I think there's really good ways to do this, and we know a lot of them. So I think we're kind of coming into the last few minutes. It's kind of breezed by. What I'd like to do to kind of bring us home, my experience within the world of sustainability is that it's all about figuring out a balance, figuring out a trade-off. And I wanted to ask my panelists, as you've been in this world, what are kind of the Solomonic decisions that you face that can maybe help us to grapple with the trade-offs that society is going to need to make? Behavior change, which is something that we talked about, consuming less, introducing greater circularity into our habits. Give me a few examples of some of the really difficult decisions that you think are ahead of us. Who wants to start? Prescott.
Yeah, I think going back to the behavior change and everything, it's a question of, do you try to take the system we have today and make it better and clean it up, or do you say, okay, well, we can change basic parameters of it? And on that point, I want to say, to your point in response to what I was saying about behavior change, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, I'm the worst person to be talking about behavior change. I'm a childless millennial that lives in downtown San Francisco, and I'm a renter, right? Like, of course I want, high density housing and public transit and all these other things. And at the end of the day, like, it's not about me preaching to people, like, get out of your minivan and stop living in the suburbs. It's why do people do that, and why will I probably do that in 5 years when I buy my car? It's because we've created these, so it's not that it's like individuals are to blame. It's that the collective design of how society is set up makes it easier to do certain things over others. And the question, the trade-off is always, do you try just having the short-term fix of, okay, let's electrify as much as we can in the current system, versus how much do you say, no, I'm really going to use political and economic capital to try changing all these system things. So it's an ongoing question.
Yeah.
I would just say, thank you, childless millennial that lives in downtown San Francisco. I totally feel you. And then when I moved out to the burbs, I did the exact same thing that we're talking about. So I think that you have to, again, I will take this from the perspective of government, for starters. And I think that some of the trade-offs that governments have to make is, there are a lot of states that have really ambitious carbon reduction goals and transportation electrification goals. And for them, that choice, that hard choice, is where do they find the money to do it? And how do they put it in the right hands? Because we didn't even get to the discussion really about equity and making sure that this is across the board an opportunity for everyone. And so I think that just as I think about what life looks like in the West in particular, how can we help governments incentivize that kind of opportunity? And is it something that all of us are willing to put in a little bit more for rates, put in a little bit more on our taxes? And so I think that's something that we all need to think about. Is it worth that trade-off? From the private sector, one of the things that we have to really think about is we look at how rapid scale this work is being done, trying to keep up with all of the regulations that are going on nationwide, whether it's at an administrative level, like the California Energy Commission, or if it's at a pure regulatory level, like the Nevada Public Utility Commission. How do we keep our finger on the pulse of that to make sure that things aren't happening that are, again, having that chilling effect on the market and putting brakes on innovation and opportunity. So I think that's one of the things that we have to decide every day. The other thing that we have to sort of look at and decide every day is like, where are really the best opportunities? And, and there's a lot of calculus that go with that. Is it the best opportunity for our company? Is it the best opportunity for the greater return for societal benefits? And when we look at, for example, NEVI's amazing. It is such a great program, just the innovation and the vision to say, like, we're going to create the same type of interconnected system that we created with the interstate highways. It's fantastic. I have lots of things I could say about the West and how that's going to work in the West, but I'm not on the panel to talk about that. So, but I think we have to decide what are the real business opportunities. A lot of these states, all they're able to do this first year is just try to upgrade their systems and upgrade the sites so that they can then move to the next phase and then move to the next phase. So we have to make the decision, like, do we want to jump in right now, or do we want to jump in when things have been sort of like coordinated a little bit better, and the states have moved those highway programs forward to be able to get the certification from the Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Transportation, and their governor, so that you can start moving to the next set of charging. So it's like, it's what Prescott said about prioritizing where you're going to spend your funds and your resources and your assets. So those are some of the things that I think that we look at in terms of the hard decisions from a day-to-day business focus.
Could I make your point more concrete with an example? Equity and climate are frequently, going in the same direction, but the hard fact is that they're frequently not. The fastest thing you could do sometimes is not to electrify the rural agricultural center, because there's not a one-to-one replacement for the trucks they use. They're going to need to buy 2 trucks. They're going to have battery swapping, which doesn't exist. And so you could spend a lot of time and money trying to figure out how to make that work for the sake of equity. Or you could say, okay, we just need to electrify as many miles as possible, as fast as possible. And occasionally, those two things can happen together, but occasionally they can't. And I think we can't be too religious on either climate or on equity. We have to start acknowledging that there are trade-offs and try to find the right balance there.
Yeah, I agree there. I also think that we have to better encourage institutional capital to be able to move into this market. Non-dilutive capital from a government drives institutional capital, but even now we're not seeing it fast enough. One quick note, though, because I have an 11-year-old in addition to having a freshman in college, and my 11-year-old has only ever grown up with an electric vehicle, a plug-in battery vehicle, and we had to go on a trip to the mountains, and so we weren't sure that we would have chargers where we were going, and we rented a car, and it was diesel. And we got to the gas station, and she lost her mind. She put her hand over her mouth, and she said to me, "What is that smell?" And I said, "Well, honey, this is, internal combustion engine infrastructure. We're going to the gas station." And she said, "This is awful." And she said, "You mean people have these at their homes?" And I said, "No, darling, that's not the way internal combustion infrastructure worked. You go out to fuel your vehicle." She looked at me, she's 11 years old and sassy as all get out, and she said, "You mean people leave their homes to charge their vehicles? How dumb is that? You have to go out to do it." And for half an hour, she talked about how dumb the whole thing was. And so, believe it or not, the transformation is already happening. There is a level of already, I know you don't, I'm a country person, and, we have a farm, and I have little kids, and but it's so apparent what the future is when you get the right perspective at the right time, that I think, at least I hope, that we leave you with the notion of real optimism, because there should be.
I think that is a great place to end. I want to thank my panelists for a great conversation. The hour flew by, and thank the audience, and I hope you enjoy CoMotion.